Hello and welcome back to Read Becca for my weekly chatty catch-up on everything that I read, everything I'm currently reading, and everything I'm looking forward to reading for roughly the current week. And I read 2 books this week, which is fantastic. Let's start with the print book. I read My Murder by Katie Williams. I picked this up because Leandra from Leandra and the TBR Zero picked it up, and she and I both have previously read and enjoyed Williams' past book, Tell the Machines Goodnight, and very much enjoyed it. For me, that book was up there really high, almost a 5-star, but not quite. And it was what I consider a sticky book. So this one also fits in that category where it wasn't quite 5 stars, but they're sticky books because they're going to really hang around in my head a lot, I think. So the sum of their parts is greater than their whole, I think, where what I'm talking about is a situation of the plot and the story as a book are not 100%. But there's just so much there that this is digging into, and that's what I'm trying to get across. So what is this book? This book is about Lou, apologies, Ripley just jumped on the table, shook the camera. Louise has just been the victim of an attempted murder, and she, through experimental procedures, has continued to live on and survive. She's part of a survivors group for women who've been through the same experience she has. And as she's working with them and looking back on her experience, things increasingly seem suspicious about her murder. And so that's why it's My Murder, because she's looking into it. So it is very much a mystery thriller, but the focus is not the action or the thriller elements. So don't go into this thinking you're going to get really high plot action. I think that's going to be a problem for some readers. For me, it was definitely a selling point. I think I loved the quiet, introspective tone of this story. It's really about her looking back, and not just her, but the other women in her survivors group, looking back at the women that they were before and knowing they can't be that same person again after this thing that they've been through. And it's not just that, it's looking at technology, because this is in fact a sci-fi, and it's light on the sci-fi, I would say. This is kind of in the vein of Black Mirror, where its focus is philosophical and looking at social commentary in a slightly heightened technological world from our own. So things like VR and driving, not self-driving cars, are very prominent to this story. But there's nothing massively different from our world. So those kind of heighten and give us a way outside of our own real perspective to see this. So it's commentating a lot on that aspect of the way that trauma changes us, but also the outside technological influences that we have now with things like social media and the obsession with true crime. I'm going to kick Ripley off of the table. Apologies. Okay, Ripley's off the table, so hopefully no more shaking for now. So the obsession with true crime and the way that social media interacts with survivors and victim stories is very much what this is kind of tackling. And I love the way it sort of looked at those things in a really different means. But to what I was saying earlier, this is very introspective and internal to the character. So for me, this was much akin to the work of Sarah Gailey, who I love. I've read all of Gailey's existing work and very much enjoy it. So I'm super happy that Williams' both works feel in the same vein and give me another author to dive into for that feel, because it's so much about character over plot, where Gailey's work often gets really mismarketed because they sell the plots and not what is actually delivered in the books, and people wind up disappointed. For me, I really love that style. So let me just read a little bit at the beginning of this for the tone. We're following Lou and her husband as they've just gone out for the first time since she's been recovered and out of the hospital, and she was feeling really optimistic, but she reacts when she's out. Lou, Silas said, so Silas is the husband. A pause. I waited for him to see my feet. What are you doing? Nothing much, being a coat. The mattress dipped, then the sleeves and shoulders were lifted one by one from my face, and Silas appeared above me. He gazed down, his forehead puckered, his mouth a line. He didn't say anything about the coats, didn't say how we should have stayed home, didn't say he told me so. Like I said, he's a good man. Everyone agrees on this point. I agree on this point. He reached down and touched my cheek. You okay? Me? I'm great. I'm silk-lined and brass-buttoned. I'm double-breasted. I've got a pack of gum in my pocket. I'm ready for winter. He made a face. Too soon for a party? Maybe a little, I admitted. I'm sorry I left you. I thought you were okay. I was, I said, and then I wasn't. And then you were a coat. Brass-buttoned. What would you have done if someone had come in here to get their coat? I don't know. Gone home with them? Silas shook his head, but he was almost smiling. Maybe, I said slowly, I'll go home with you. There, smiling now. Maybe, he said. Not maybe, I will. He offered a hand, the coats falling away behind me as I was lifted up to my feet. Let's go home, he said. So that's the kind of very quiet tone that's so much about what she's feeling and what she... I don't know what it really is on today. I apologize. This is a chaotic cat day, apparently. So I love that quiet tone, focused very much on what's going on inside of her, and even in her husband's interactions with her. It's very centering her experience. So I super enjoyed this. I thought this was fantastic, and I definitely need to go check out Williams' back catalog, because I noticed that she does have some older works, like much older than the two that I've read. So I really, really need to get to that. I think if you like this, or vice versa, you should check out Any Man by Amber Tamblyn. That gave me some very similar vibes as well, but that is not sci-fi in any aspect. That's much more grounded and is following men who are victims of a serial rapist. And it looks very much, again, at the social media relationship to that and the treatment of people who have been through that trauma specifically, and the fact that in this case they're male is prominent to that discussion. So here is also an expression of kind of gendered violence as well, and serial killers against women as victims and survivors. So really love the discussion that this is happening. Then going from one book about how we process trauma to a nonfiction book that was very hard reading for me, and that was The Exvangelicals by Sarah McCammon. So this was an interesting read, and I did listen to it on audio. McCammon is not someone I was really overly familiar with, but she is a journalist who has reported on a lot of things, but definitely prominently has reported on politics. And I thought this book was fantastic because it is kind of the missing piece between a lot of books that I've read, and specifically the missing piece from Doppelganger by Naomi Klein. What the missing piece is that she delivers is this decades-long push of white Christian evangelical worldview that was built by a few prominent, powerful men over decades and decades of hard work at creating these platforms to infiltrate every aspect of suburban life, really, in the evangelical circles. And it wasn't about creating a closer relationship to Christ. It was creating that insular, singular, unchanging, and consistent worldview that was forever seeking theocratic power and influence, specifically in the US. And what was especially hard about this book for me, and the way that McCammon is presenting it, which was phenomenal as far as I'm concerned, is that she was mixing both the real and research that she was doing with memoir, and telling her personal experience as someone who had grown up in that and had been through every aspect of it, including what we now call kind of deconstruction. And that's to the title, The Exvangelicals. So this is coming at it from a perspective that there has sort of been a mass exodus in recent years, mainly of people between 20 and 40 leaving the evangelical church, why that has happened, and her experience of going through that personally, what they experienced as children that led them there. And one of the most prominent things that she does get to early on is the recent Trump presidency kind of splitting evangelical realities. That is something that comes up in Doppelganger that I think this tied into very, very nicely. So many of the things that she's talking about in this book are very well trod ground elsewhere and covered a lot. She tied in with many of the books that I have read personally on white Christian nationalism, but she didn't really dive into that research specifically. She was much more focused on that worldview that I talked about, the way that it was sort of propped up through so many different means, and the ways that the evangelical church and worldview have divorced from the teachings of Christ for many people, and that's why they have left specifically the evangelical sect of Christianity. And so this is not looking at necessarily people who have left Christianity even. It's simply people who have left evangelicalism, and a very fundamentalist version of evangelicalism even. So for me, this was especially hard, not because there was anything new or surprising here. I think every single thing in this book I knew and had some personal experience with, and that's why it was so hard, because everything from her own personal experience, everything she was reporting on, all of the history was all completely known to me, but it's so well and impeccably researched and presented in a really concise, understandable way. And it gets to the core of the incredibly painful experience that many of us have gone through in being brought up in the evangelical circles and eventually having to work our way through leaving. And so that was hard. I think probably, I've mentioned I've cried an awful lot at books this year. I definitely cried several times while reading this. It was very, very difficult to read. And again, there was nothing there that was surprising at all. But the mix of calling out what the higher ups were doing, along with the personal accounts, was just, and it being things I specifically have experienced. And there's not anything shocking even really there, at least not to me, probably because I at least know of it. But it was just so hard, so difficult. So I think if you are someone who is formerly evangelical or even still evangelical, it will be kind of difficult to listen to. So I think one of the things I would really highlight that I think was done fantastically here is that often when an author of nonfiction is mixing in their memoir, it can feel a little thrown in or tangential, and it did not here at all. She did such a fantastic job of making it brief, making it meaningful to what she's talking about, and tying in her memoir moments as an illustration of exactly what she's talking about. And so I think it married together as examples perfectly the way that she was talking through all of this. And yeah, it was just a brutal read. Honestly, this was so hard to read. So for me, it was a 5-star read. It was absolutely perfect. In terms of delivery, in terms of the way the information was laid out, in terms of expressing exactly what the evangelical experience was growing up, primarily at the height in the 80s to 90s. And I think when we're looking at where we're at today and the schism within evangelical circles that's happened and the extremism that has grown, she did a great job of demonstrating things like the way that once you have that very insular worldview, even just simply facing realities that are outside of that worldview, things like the existence of gay people can feel like attacks on your reality. And so that's a big piece of why we are where we are with separate realities in the US right now. Things like growing up with extremely revisionist history or outright disinformation that has been pushed through powerful people for decades, and then just finding out by way of the fact that we have such access to information now has really confronted that worldview in many ways that people can't move forward with. And I think that's probably a big prominent element. Obviously, the 80s to 90s were the heyday of this. And then the internet came about, and so many people suddenly couldn't keep up that insulated bubble any longer. And as soon as that was challenged, everything about creating this evangelical movement from the top down was about maintaining that bubble. And as soon as that bubble was infiltrated with information from outside, it just doesn't hold up. And so that is the thing that she's putting forward as why we are where we are in many ways. So yeah, I thought this was so powerful. Yeah, so this just hit on so many points on different fronts that were both personal, political, about the ways that we see the world differently throughout the US. And that's a topic that is of specific interest to me, certainly, and I think has only become even more and more prominently important for us to all understand. So I highly recommend this if you are an evangelical who wants to understand why people are leaving. This would be a great read. If you are formerly evangelical, you will probably feel a lot of catharsis and seen a bit if you read this. And if you don't understand evangelicalism at all, I also really, really recommend this because it will give you both the bigger picture and the individual picture. The one thing I think I would say as a critique of this from me is that I did really want more about the people on top who were kind of doing the insidious maneuvers of controlling all of this, the people who were involved in the radio programs and the different messaging and controlling homeschool curriculum and all of that stuff that pulled together to control families in exactly how they operated. it was just very hard reading because all of that stuff impacted everyone's day-to-day lives that were involved in the evangelical movement in such damaging ways. And she talked very significantly about the damage that has been done. So, hardly recommend this book. I think it would be very, very important for anyone to read and understand where we are at in the US today. Anyway, so those are the books I read this week. I'm currently reading, for Book Trek, Star Trek, Q and False and Other Stories. This is a collection of short stories by multiple authors. And I also need to begin Hellbent by Leigh Bardugo. Something is wrong with me because I just finished Ninth House and I really enjoyed it, and I have Hellbent here to get to, but I keep going like, how can I fit things in between before I run out of time on this one? I just need to get started on it and actually read the book because I'm sure I'm going to enjoy it. Onward to what I watched this week. A fairly lightish watching week. So I have been watching Great British Menu season 7. I had previously watched season 5. 6 is not available for whatever reason. And 7 I started weeks ago and have been slowly plowing through because it's a very long series show. There's like 40 episodes every season. And season 7 was great, but also they were a lot harder on everyone, and there were some not nice moments, I think, in this season that I didn't really like as much as the previous season. But it was still great. I really have enjoyed that show. I newly discovered it this year, so I'm now slowly but surely working my way through. I also finished up Defending the Guilty, a show about lawyers, specifically defending guilty people. And we're mainly following trainees, it seems, with the people who they're apprenticing with, sort of. I'm not familiar with the British legal system, and that's what this is set in. So we're following one legal trainee, and primarily he is paired up with, I can't think of her name, I think it's Katie something, but she was the actress in IT Crowd. And she is the same sort of character, but it's almost flipped, because in that she was very snarky, but she also had no clue what she was talking about. She didn't know anything about computers. And here, she's like the expert, but she's really jaded about it, kind of deal, and she's also still the same snarky character. So I enjoyed her very, very much. So that was really, really great. But it's also only a single season, and I don't know if there's any more, and it felt really incomplete. So I enjoyed what there was of it, but it didn't feel like a complete show at all. So I think that's it for what I watched this week that I finished. In terms of life, not very much to talk about, but, not very much to talk about in terms of actual things I've been doing, but I very excitingly have kittens from the shelter. So I'm fostering 3 kittens who they were supposed to be like a little bit spicy and need some help socializing, so that's why they're with me, but they're really not very. Like, one of them was a little hissy, and within 2 days was completely fine. And is a little bit shy now, maybe, but they're little kittens, so they're great. So I will definitely put in some video here so you can see. They are absolutely adorable. They're about 2 months right now. 2 of them are extremely friendly and sweet. One of them is a total lap cat, and it's really tempting me to foster fail, but I'm not going to, because I do not need a 4th cat. And then the 3rd one is a little bit shy, but fortunately she is bonding with one of the friendly ones, and I think they will do very, very well. She is so curious that she's not going to have any trouble. I think when she gets into a home, she will most likely open up as soon as someone has treats and or toys. Hey, tiny squeak. What? What are you talking about? What? Are you telling a story? Yeah. Is it nap time? Tell a bedtime story? Yeah. Is that a spicy cat? She doesn't look very spicy. It's okay. You're purring. Good girl. Good girl. So that's the excitement for my week, I think. I don't think I have anything else that I really want to talk about. So on to recommendations this week. I have a couple of them. Number one is that Books from My Bookshelf did a really fantastic video on the importance of fiction. that I enjoyed very much and I recommend you check out. As well, there was also a really fantastic live stream of the Locus Awards. So if you have any interest at all in sci-fi and fantasy book awards, this is one of the, I guess, more expansive because they have categories for each speculative fiction genre, rather than just having a single novel category. And it was a great ceremony. I'm not so sure I was on board with the host. It was sort of a musical host, but the hosting and announcing, they kept extremely minimal. So a couple of lines of speech between announcing the next category, and that was it. Very, very much limited down to primarily the authors giving their speeches and whatnot. And most of the speeches were not live, they were recorded. So that was great, because we got to see a lot of people in their personal environment. We got to see Kelly Link holding and petting a chicken. As usual, T. Kingfisher gave us some wonderful science and nature facts on the skunk cabbage this time around. She does that every time she wins something, where she will just talk science and nature rather than giving a thank you speech. And Vajra Chandrasekhar, who wrote Saint of Bright Doors, also gave a really heartfelt and deep, compelling speech on the topic of things going on in the world right now. So it was a great mix of authors who were quirky nerds. Yeah, I would say that. We also had Cory Doctorow was there in person and gave a nice lecture on Luddites. That was fantastic. I always love Cory Doctorow. Basically anything he has to say, I will listen. Yeah, so it was a wonderful mix. But I guess that dovetails kind of well with Vajra Chandrasekhar. Saint of Bright Doors has now won prizes for both the Nebula and the Locus. He won Best Debut for the Locus and Best Novel for the Nebula. But this week, dovetailing in, we got the announcement of nominees for the Ursula K. Le Guin Prize, my favorite prize, yay! So I do intend to do a reaction video to that. I've not been having a ton of energy to film, but I intend to do something at least quick reacting to the list. I have not gone through in depth and really looked at, other than most of the stuff is stuff I haven't seen before really, which is great and why I love the Le Guin Prize, but Saint of Bright Doors was on there. So that bodes well, and the fact that it has both won big prizes, like the major prizes, and also is now on the nominee list for Ursula K. Le Guin Prize bumps it right up my list of things I want to get to. So I will be trying to get to that sooner rather than later, but I also have a lot of Le Guin Prize stuff from last year still to get to that I wanted to get to by now. Anyway, so that is all my recommendations for the week. I will link all of those down below so you can check them out for yourself, and hopefully I will have a Le Guin Prize reaction coming up this week, maybe, or next week, we'll see. Anyway, that is all for me today. Thank you so very much for watching.